Welcome to Grasshopper. I'm so excited today. We have two authors here with us, Tina Opie and Beth Livingston, both doctors, I should say, and they are the authors of Shared Sisterhood. They are going to share everything about this wonderful book and their mission with us. So please enjoy the next 45 minutes to an hour. To get us started, you all know me, Heather. I am the founder and CEO of Grasshopper, but I'm going to let Beth and Tina introduce themselves. I'm just doing this in alphabetical order here. So let's start with Beth. You look like a serial academic. I am as well. So tell us all about your journey.
Yes. Well, I'm a serial academic because one thing I found when I was very young is school was the thing that I was really the only thing I was truly good at. And I said, you know what, if I can find a way to stay here forever, I'm going to do that. And so I have. I went to college and I never left, apparently. I grew up in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky. You can try to say that correctly, the Louisville way. And I went to the University of Kentucky for my undergrad and my master's, and then went to the University of Florida for my PhD. And then I actually started my career at Cornell University in upstate New York in their School of Industrial and Labor Relations for 8 years, and then joined the University of Iowa in 2017 to join the business school. It has been a wonderful experience being here, being a Hawkeye, being in the Midwest, the furthest west I've ever lived. And what I really enjoy about being a part of the business school is it's really nice having all the different perspectives here in terms of there's accounting and finance and economics and marketing. And I enjoy talking and seeing how other people see the same problems that I see. I find that to be really interesting. I am married. I've been married for, how can I ever do math? I don't even know. So for 17 years now. I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. I would say we had pets, but we are, for the first time in my life, petless for right now, which is odd and strange. We used to have guinea pigs. Those guinea pigs have been rehomed because guinea pigs are not the best. Don't ever let your child talk you into guinea pigs if you don't want to get guinea pigs, is what I will say about that. I study gender, diversity, the management of work and family, and remote work. And Tina and I have been working together for many years now. So,
And we're going to talk about how you met in a bit. But Tina, can you introduce yourself?
Yes. So let's see. Wow. Military brat. Traveled all over as a result, born in the Philippines, born in California, then moved to Philippines and back to California, then around the United States, primarily in Northern Virginia though. But as a result of all that moving, I was always an outsider trying to figure out how to make my way in. And that has definitely contributed, I think, to my personality as well as to my research interests. I went to undergrad at James Madison University. Then worked at Nations Bank, then got my MBA at Darden at the University of Virginia, went into consulting, and then observed my husband. We got married in 2000. We just celebrated 23 years of marriage on the 22nd. I'm like, wow, we should have a whole different Grasshopper about relationships, because anyone who's been with anyone for more than, 6 months knows what it's like to feel like, maybe, is this going to work, brother? I don't know. And then you have to make a choice to stay in it. So that would be an interesting conversation.
I'm up for that. And
me Beth, too. Let's talk about how you negotiate in a couple about the career balance. Choices you're making.
Beth, because that's balance is a big thing for you as well. So yes.
Yeah. Because who you choose as your partner affects. I don't think I would be in the career that I am in now if I hadn't married my husband, because he's supportive. He's also an academic. I'm a tenure professor at Babson College. So is my husband. I founded Opie Consulting Group in 2019, but Beth, it's been 4 years now. And then the company really took off right after that, after George Floyd was murdered. And I created Shared Sisterhood maybe 15 years ago, but I developed it with Beth. and we've been working together for over 10 years on different things and shared sisterhood. Has it been 5 years now?
It's been almost 5.5 now.
Yeah.
5.5,
So it's
yeah.
been 5 years now. I like to say that I created shared sisterhood before Beth, but thank God she came along because the white paper sucked before.
It did not suck as bad as she thinks it sucked, but I am glad that you invited me in to your sisterhood, Tina, for sure.
Yeah, so and it really shared sister. I know we're gonna get into this later, so I'll stop talking. But I have 2 children we're taking them off to college August 7th and 8th. Maybe I shouldn't say that because then people will know when my house is not occupied.
They don't know what
twins.
Okay.
No, they're not twins. So I have an older son and a younger daughter. So they have both taken their own unique paths. My son he went to college last year. He's transferring to another college. And my daughter is starting college for the first time in the fall, where she will be playing lacrosse on scholarship. They're both playing lacrosse. Yeah, they're phenoms, but my husband and I are adjusting. I will be crying. He said he will be cheering. So
yeah. Everyone has a different reaction to that.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll have a little bit of both. My kids are 2 and 3, so I've got a long way to go.
Yeah, it's, you know what? So we're all at 3 different phases. All I can say is, before you know it, you're going to be reflecting on this conversation.
I know.
Yours will be going off to college, and so will Beth's, and mine will be married or something, because it feels really slow when you're in it.
Yes.
But afterwards, it's so fast.
The days are long and the years are short.
Yes.
Yep.
That's a great way to put it.
That's exactly it. So we'll transition into how you met, but in that story as well, can you tell us a little bit about, Tina, how you said you created Shared Sisterhood, and then I'm sure it's taken on many different personalities. Like, how did it come to be what it is today with Beth's help as well? And we'll probably answer the sort of next question, which is, what is Shared Sisterhood, in this a little bit, but just kind of queuing you up for the next question as well, because I'm sure this story will encompass a bit of that as well.
Yes. So I first heard the term Shared Sisterhood at the Academy of Management at a professional development workshop. And I was asked to develop it, to sort of give it meat and bones. And so I'm married to a historian. And the question that I had was, if feminism is real, why haven't women, specifically Black and white women, helped each other more in the workplace? I didn't understand it. And so that's how I wanted to develop the idea of shared sisterhood, because I can have sisterhood with someone who is similar to me, but what would it be like to share sisterhood with someone who is different? So I started to do research on the history of the workplace, and I found that just for decades, even more than a century, we just didn't trust each other as women. And you hear the stereotypes about women being catty, et cetera. Well, I knew that not to be true, in particular because of the relationship I had with Beth, but other women. So I knew that wasn't true. So then I wanted to find out, well, what explains the inhibitors to a deep interpersonal connection in the workplace that would then lead to collective action that benefits all women, because we know that we're underpaid, we know that we're under-promoted, we tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. So how can we help each other have better workplace outcomes? So I'll just fast forward past the pitiful white paper, and Beth and I'll get to how we met. I had just given a talk. I think it was my obesity work that I had given a talk on, which I still need to publish. Beth, we should talk about that. But anyway, so
put a pin in that.
Yeah, exactly. I had finished giving a talk, and then Beth sort of skipped up to me and said, "Hey," introduced herself, and I was like, "Whoa, who is this lady?" I didn't know who she was. Beth, do you want to take it over from there?
Yeah. So let's just say that in my younger years, I was a lot extroverted, a little loud, and very similar to a golden retriever puppy, right? Just come on, and I love people. I still love people to this day. And I had heard of Tina's work, and I'd heard of Tina as a person because we had some mutual friends. And I was super excited to talk to her. And Tina likes to joke that I skipped up to her, which is probably literally true, and that I probably literally skipped up to her. But again, she didn't know me. And I went into that thinking, well, we're meeting. Of course, she's going to like me. Like, why, we're going to get along. Everything's going to be great. Wah, wah, wah. Here we are, we're besties, right? Like, this is kind of my mental process. And Tina was polite, but she did not react to me that way, right? She did not go, oh, gotcha. Right? Like, that was not the reaction. And I think it was in that moment, like I had a choice to make, because I think that we as women often in those moments make choices, right? We're like, well, how dare you, not connect with me? What's wrong with you? Right? What's wrong with me? Everybody hates me. I want to go get in a corner and cry. Like, those are two kind of reactions to that. The other reaction, which is one that I think inspired all, this work on shared sisterhood, is empathy. Well, why might she be reacting this way? Right. And, given the fact that I had done some work thinking through race, power, difference, what it means to be a Black woman in our field, which is not an easy road to go. Tina is one of very few Black women with tenure in management academia, right? And incredibly important, I think, to point out that accomplishment, because, at the time we were graduate students, right? We did not have that level of power. And so I knew how difficult that was. And I chose in that moment to empathize with Tina and to make the effort to demonstrate my trustworthiness, instead of blaming her for not trusting me or blaming myself for not being trustworthy. And I think that is how this sort of us coming together to work together and what shared sisterhood is. It really does become this sort of microcosm where, and in that moment, Tina then also had to make a choice of whether she wanted to respond to my overtures, right? And give us a chance to develop that sort of trust that we talk about in shared sisterhood.
And Heather, I really want to underscore what Beth just said,
Yeah.
because this is a dynamic that I think this is a common dynamic where you have people, specifically women, who are trying to interact with each other, and they can sense one person is much more eager to connect than the other.
Yeah.
And especially if the person who's eager is a white woman and the person who's not as receptive is a Black woman. I've often heard, well, she was just mean, or she was, distant, or she's difficult. But I really want to underscore what Beth did, which was she empathized. And then I want to underscore what I did, which is I had to actually dig. I had to ask myself, why are you not responding as warmly to Beth as you might? And, this may strike some of your listeners by surprise, but, I'm human and I have encountered racism, and often at the hands of white women in the workplace. And so when Beth approached me, it wasn't that I could individuate and only see her. What I saw, she was a proxy for all white women, in particular, white women who had harmed me. And so that's the thought that came to my mind. And I had to decide if I was going to individuate or if I was going to continue to process Beth as a proxy for all white women.
Yep.
And while that collective processing is protective, because, I had put on an armor for a reason. It wasn't like I put on this armor because of imaginary things. So, but I had to decide if I was going to put that armor down to allow sunlight, water, fresh air to get to me. And thank goodness I decided to.
So can I dig a little bit deeper? So Beth, when you said you needed to empathize, like what were those actual actions you took? Like, how did you change your tone, your conversation? And then Tina as well, like you said, you kind of put down that armor. How did you do that? Like what changed and how did it change your conversation?
So I'll say this first, like it wasn't I immediately read Tina's body language and immediately structured my behavior, right? Like now I think I could do that better because I've practiced these skills. Like I could read people better in that moment and exercise that. But we had a collegial, perfectly professional conversation. I backed away from that. We went back to our respective places, and I had to, you do this thing with these big conferences, you reflect on everything, okay, well, what relationships did you build? What projects are you going to work on? How do these things work? It was in the early stages of Facebook era, right? Like early stages of Facebook. I think you still had to have a .edu to like connect
Oh, I remember that.
that sort of
Yep.
stuff.
Oh my
And
gosh.
what I reflected on, well, wow, that didn't go right. Cause I was excited to meet Tina and I was like, that didn't go like I thought it was going to go. And so I had developed over a few years more self-reflective tendencies for various reasons. And I had to sit with all of that. And I could have self-reflected in a very selfish way, which a lot of us learn to do first, right? Which is, well, I know myself really well. And so let me reflect on what I did in that situation, which is important. But I had also done enough work to recognize the structural components around, well, why did I react this way? Why might Tina have reacted that way, right? Without putting myself at the center of that conversation, but really be like, oh, wow. And I really did reflect and be like, oh, I bet she was wary of me. I bet I put her on her guard. Right. And instead of being like, how dare she be on her guard? I'm a perfectly pleasant woman. My conversation was, oh, next time I'm going to do that different. Right. And so I actually said to myself, next time I'm going to ask her more questions about her. I'm going to get to know her more. I'm going to demonstrate my interest in her. So she knows that I'm not just like trying to like compete with her. That was the way I saw it, is I don't want her to feel like I'm trying to compete with her. I want her to see me as someone who can collaborate with. That was the extent of it. It wasn't, I want to be her bestie at that point. It was, really, I don't want her to see me as competition or as a threat. And how can I make sure that my behavior demonstrates that? But all of that is because not only did I have self-reflective skills, but because I had the knowledge of the structure the water we were swimming in as female academics, to say, oh, wait, right, I see now how she might have felt. But that also means you have to get out of you. I had to get out. I couldn't take that personally. I couldn't be like, how dare she, right? Like, I'm such a nice person, right? I couldn't make it about me. I had to step out of that. And that can be a hard thing to do. Tina?
Yeah, I mean, and I had to do something similar. The one thing is I found out that Beth and I had a friend in common. And she's a Black woman who, I mean, she's really close to Beth. She was much closer to Beth, and had gone to school with her. And so I knew this woman as well. And she was like, yeah, Beth is legit. So then that I could exhale a bit. And I've started to say, well, what specifically happened? What triggered? And I realized that what was happening is in academia in particular, I had felt that many of my interactions with white women had been transactional, where they came to me when they needed something, but not when I was in need, not when I needed support. Sort of like if something traumatic happened to a Black person, I wouldn't get emails from people. I would get public comments in a meeting. Oh, we're so sorry that this happened, but no one would reach out to me individually, et cetera, or very rarely would people do that. And so it made me feel as though I was just something to be emptied, to serve them. And so when Beth came up to me that enthusiastically, I was like, is this sincere? Is this real? And I do like to give another analogy because sometimes it can help women to hear this example, which is where how many women have been walking somewhere at night and they dial 911 on the phone and keep their finger hovering over the last one in case they have to dial 911, or they they call their friends when they get into a taxi and say, hey, I should be there in 10 minutes. If I'm not, my hackles just went up, or they put a pin between their finger to use as a weapon. Is that because you don't trust men? Is it because you're paranoid? No, it's because statistically, we know that we may be the people who are victims of a particular behavior, often from men to women. And this is the hard part for some white women to hear. I have been harmed more by white women than, other women. And other women of color have said the same thing. And it may or may not be intentional, but the impact is still one where
it's a real impact.
It's a real impact, and it makes me skittish, just as it would if somebody said something to you, a man said something to you, and you're like, wait a minute, why would he say that? It sort of makes your hackles rise. Yeah. So, but I began to just really ask myself, what kind of relationship do I want? Has Beth done anything as an individual to warrant distance? And the answer was no. So then we started a relationship, and I think just like in any relationship, there are incremental steps that you take. You don't immediately go to let's get married and have children. You don't immediately go to that. You're like, well, let's go on a date. Let's talk. You get to know each other. You talk about things that you have in common, which is what we did. And then as we established that connection or bridge, we began to talk about things where we differed. So in the book, I talk about how I'm a Black Christian woman and Beth is a white atheist woman. We talked about some of those things and how that led to different opinions on different popular current events, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll stop talking now, but that's in a nutshell what happened.
Gotcha. So then we're moving to what is shared sisterhood, but I want to hear more about how, Beth became a part of it as well.
Tina, do you want to start with, I know you don't want to go into the white paper too much, but do you want to start with, because I think I know, because I've read the white paper, that some of the stuff that's germinated into the book really started in that white paper, the work that you did to kind of dig into it. And then we developed it a little bit. So, just big picture before Tina says that, shared sisterhood is what we call like a radically optimistic philosophy that we can achieve collective action towards racial equity and gender equity at work if we build authentic connections with people who are different from us. And to do that, to build those bridges with people, we have to dig into our preconceptions about race, about power, about the structures that we did. So there's kind of 3 levels to it. You dig into those perceptions of race, you build bridges with people who are different from you, and then together you can work to establish equity at work. That is where it is now. It did not start there. And so Tina, do you want to tell a little bit of that story perhaps?
Yeah, so I would say before Beth, shared sisterhood evolved in 2 phases. And then so the first phase was, I was really curious about the historical relationship between Black and white women in particular, and also the suffrage movement. So I started doing research on the different roles that Black and white women played and how they supported each other, et cetera, et cetera. Then that was the first phase. And I shelved that paper because I'm like, how is this related to the workplace? How am I going to publish this? Blah, put it on the shelf. Then things started happening. I moved to a new neighborhood and I really wanted to develop a relationship with the women. So I just put a post on a mom's group and I asked if anyone would be interested in learning about shared sisterhood and learning how we could develop better relationships. And I thought like a couple of people would respond. I had over 100 responses.
Wow.
And to who wanted to come. And the thing is, I was like, I can't do this in my house. So one of my neighbors donated a yoga studio or a room in a yoga studio, and it wasn't going to accommodate 100 people. So I had to choose, like, I think it was 30 women or so. And I wanted to make sure that they were different ages, different racial ethnicities, different religions, different, everything. So different occupations. So we had about 30 people who showed up, and it was supposed to be an hour and a half or so. Like 4 hours later, we're talking in the parking lot. And to get ready for that meeting, because I'm really entrepreneurial, where I posted it and said, we're going to do it before I really knew what we're going to talk about. And one of the things that I realized, if I'm going to bring all these women together, we have to have some base understanding. And so that's when I came up with the idea of Dig and Bridge, where I literally put up, an industrial size caterpillar. What are those things?
My kids know an excavator, a digger.
Yes, thing, exactly those things. Because the chasm of misunderstanding and ignorance between people at the group level was so large that I'm like, we really have to dig into ourselves. We need to stop trying to I know we want to connect with each other, but here are a couple of exercises you can do to really understand where you're coming from. And that was, there's someone named Phinney, Phinney, and they have a multi-ethnic identity or identification model, which basically examines how much you've investigated your race, your ethnicity, how much you practice cultural practices there, and how confident or much it means to you to be part of this particular racial ethnic group, to your identity. And the people were shocked. And then we started to bridge, we started to connect across difference now that we have been a little bit more informed of where we stood as individuals. And then we began to brainstorm about solutions. As a result of that, because I said, look, this is great and all, but I cannot be the only one running this group. So I started a Facebook group and I said, I need some people to help. So that group grew from 30 to maybe 300 to 3,000 to over 4,000. And it really grew when I did this video. It was like a plea to white women after George Floyd was murdered.
Yep.
So I had a video on that. And to be honest, I have let the group sort of dissipate. It's really latent at this point. But those were the first two phases. And then when I saw that there was really a ton of interest in this, I can't remember the exact timing of what came first, but at this point, Beth and I have been talking about it. I think we may have had some Harvard Business Review papers, done some
We
podcasts.
did. Yep.
Beth,
And you had been talking about a book for a while. It was just more along of what that was going to look like.
yeah,
But I think you weren't clear about yet.
yeah. Heather, that's probably more detail than you want to know.
No, that was perfect. So how do we get to why are authentic connections and collaborative actions such important tools for your philosophy?
Yeah, I think I always, in academia and in management academia in particular, we're very applied social science, right? So we're not just interested in what people do and why they do them. We're interested in how those things translate into the workplace. It's one reason why Tina and I work so much with managers, with people who work in organizations, with policymakers. It's because that's our end goal, is to change policy within organizations, make change, right? That's kind of why we do what we do. And so I think it was important, Tina's, that's really where her question started with, which is why aren't women working together, with the goal of being, how can we get women to work together towards equity, right? Like what are the roadblocks there and how can we work through them? And I think one of the things that has, we've really focused on throughout this process is that we can't get there alone. Right. If it was just the fact that you just need one person who cares a lot and is really smart and capable, well, Tina or myself would have solved this a long time ago. If that's all it took was, one person wanting to, right, and having the capability or the thoughts of. And I think there's a long literature in collective action and the role. I mean, the entire union movement is built on the fact that collective action can change, right, structures and can change policy and can change people. And I think what we realized is, well, then why aren't these connections happening? And what at the heart of that, and what Tina, really focused on in her early paper, and what we've really gone into in depth in the book, is that this lack of trust means I don't know if when it gets to the hard part of us trying to create change in this organization, can I trust that you're not going to throw me under the bus, that you're not going to get yours and leave me? And I think that is the real crux, because Tina and I, we talk a lot and we talk about really deep, important things. And I think, that's kind of what we got to is I'm not sure that you're not just going to put it all on me and I'm going to be the one left holding all of this. And getting past that is really, I think we realized, was one of the biggest roadblocks. And so we focused on this authentic connection as a way to be able to trust that we're going to be able to work together to do the collective action, the hard work.
Yeah. And actually what's interesting, so I have two responses. The first is people are already connected, meaning they may see each other at work, they may see each other at the grocery store, in the neighborhood, but they're not necessarily authentically connected, which is where they empathize, they're vulnerable, they take risk, and they trust each other, as a result of the first three. So we really wanted to think about, okay, well, we may rub shoulders with each other, but how do we actually fellowship with each other? How do we come to an understanding? So that was critical. The other thing is, I want to go back to unions that Beth brought up. So the unions were based on coalition, but yet the unions were racist, right? They excluded unions in particular were an incredibly racist system. And if you look at the history of unions, and there was some sexism involved in certain things, but Black people, some union members would actually choose not to move forward if it meant including Black people. And so this is an example of how, I'm certain that there was someone in that union who felt like that wasn't right, but they weren't necessarily willing to take a risk. on behalf of people who were being excluded. So what we really want to get at is, okay, this is the way that we operate as a world, as a society. They're always us versus them, paradigms. How can we surpass that? How can we surmount that? Because we are much stronger together than we are as individuals. And that's the reason why collaboration versus competition is critical. Many people look at what's going on in the world now. In my opinion, it's being framed as a zero-sum game, such that every gain for one group is a disadvantage or something that's unfair and unearned by another group. That's a very competitive stance to take. A collaborative stance, which is what shared sisterhood is, says, how can we really come together and understand what's happening, and how can we actually increase the pie? So yes, you may get a smaller percentage, but 10% of 1,000,000 is a lot more than 50% of 1,000. So what would you prefer that you have?
Yep. I think our next question is going to let us dig into some of these risks. So what type of risks in the workplace have you seen that have advanced your agenda?
One of the things when we talk about risk taking, it's a hard conversation to have. What does it mean to take risks? And it's something that's the subject of some of Tina and I's ongoing academic research right now, as we're really digging into what it means to take risks. And one of the things that we're focusing on right now, there are different types of risk, are interpersonal risks, right? At the crux of shared sisterhood is this authentic interpersonal connection. That's the fact that we need to talk about two people, can't just be in my own heart and my own mind, and it can't just be structural policies, that there's this intermediate step that's people connecting with people, women connecting with women, right? In this case. And so we're talking about interpersonal risks. And one of the risks, for instance, that we are talking about is speaking up in a public way, right? Speaking up when something seems unfair, instead of, right, in contrast, the sort of private, like, oh, are you okay, in the hallway, or I saw what happened, that's not right. That doesn't actually require you to put yourself out there to take any risk. And I think that's one of the things we've seen in our preliminary research. It's something that Tina and I have seen anecdotally, is that this can cause a lot of harm to burgeoning trust, right? If you're like, yes, I'm on your side. Yeah. Like if Tina and I were in a meeting together, right? And someone said something, whether directly racist or obliquely racist, something that was definitely inappropriate and racial in tone about Black women, about Black people, right? Anything like that. And if in that moment I had an opportunity to say something and I didn't, maybe I awkwardly laugh, maybe I glance at her, maybe I panic, whatever that is, and I had an opportunity to say something and I didn't. But after the meeting, I'm like, oh my gosh, did you see what happened in there? I can't believe that. That's ridiculous, right? That can almost be more harmful than if I hadn't said anything at all, because then it's you want me to trust you, but you're not willing to stand up for me, right, in front of other people. And it's that sort of risk that I think we're focusing on right now, are these interpersonal risks that everyone who has some sort of power at work, whether it's power due to your position or power, due to your race, your ethnicity, your age, whatever it is, can wield. It's just, when do you choose to wield it and for whom? Tina?
Yeah. And in addition to speaking up when something negative happens, status granting status. So when someone does something amazing, speak up and repeat that in front of other people. There's a tool called amplification, which we can get into that or not. I talked about it in my TEDx talk. We talked about it in the book. We talk about it when we speak, which is basically, say the three of us were going into a meeting, and let's say, Heather, that you wanted to talk about amplification. You'd say, Tina, I'm going to talk about my idea on amplification. And as soon as I say that, I want you to say, Heather, your idea on amplification is amazing. And then you'd say, Beth, as soon as Tina says that, say, Tina, I agree. Heather's idea on amplification is awesome, to create the echo chamber, right? And so that is another way of taking a risk, because there have been so many instances where women say, somebody else, often a man, took credit for my idea. This is a way to inoculate that. And it's also a way, as I said, to grant status to that person, to give them sort of a boost in terms of their social capital, their political capital potentially as well in the workplace, because they're someone who is able to come up with good ideas and who gets the support of their team members. So those are the kinds of things, examples of taking risks. And there's interpersonal risk. There's also risk like where you go to the head of HR and you say, look, there's all kinds of research which says that women are underpaid. I'd like a pay equity audit.
Yeah.
And maybe you're a man. Maybe you're a white man and you say, this is true. And if anyone is being underpaid, then we're all being underpaid, sort of, because we're not getting the full benefit of everyone's participation and contribution. It's not an equitable situation where everyone is being rewarded as they should be, which damages everyone. This is not just a situation for Black women or Black men or white women or women, et cetera. This is a collective issue for the entire organization. Everyone benefits when equity is achieved.
Yeah. Is there, oh, sorry, Beth, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, is there a piece of your implementation that focuses on helping people or training to take risks? Because a lot of us want to, but maybe because of our own personal histories, whether it is something we've experienced as a child or other experiences we've had stop us from doing that. Is there something in your training that helps people become a little bolder or take that sort of fear out of the practice?
Beth, do you want me to talk about my course? I've designed courses to do that. I mean, that's more specific to Opie Consulting Group.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the book, so I'll talk about two things. In the book, well, actually, Beth, do you want to talk about in the book and then I'll talk about my
No,
book?
you go ahead and they meld together, I think.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I have a course on shared sisterhood. And when I have been doing even before the book, and in this, when we talk about taking risks, there are any number of steps that you can take. So one of the first things is I ask people to write down when the idea of taking a risk starts. If people were probably wearing heart rate monitors,
Yeah.
and if they spit into a cup or a vial and we measured their cortisol,
Yeah.
stress has probably gone up, their heart rate has started to increase. And so I really ask them to take note of that and to write down what those physiological symptoms are, because there's some kind of arousal that is happening. And then I ask them to write down the emotion that they're feeling. And so what you'll notice is I'm not immediately saying, hey, jump into the pool. I'm asking you, okay, so we talked about jumping into the pool. How are you feeling? What did your stomach drop? Did your throat constrict? Did your palms start to sweat? And how are you feeling? Are you feeling afraid? Are you feeling concerned that you're going to be judged because you think you can't swim? Do you think you look fat in your swimsuit? What's the convergence of cognitions and emotions that are happening?
Yep.
And then I ask you to share those with a partner, with someone else in the room, in the group, because part of the clamp that fear has on us and when it comes to risk taking is that we're afraid to admit it many times. And so sometimes just by sharing that with another partner, and when you hear that your partner's concerns may be very similar, what we realize is, guess what? Most people have fear when they take risks. It is not as though there's some superhero who is never afraid of taking a risk. I don't know the person who's not. Because by definition, a risk is engaging in some kind of behavior that can cause you a loss.
Yeah.
Who do you know who wants to intentionally have a loss in money, in social capital, in time, whatever? Who do you know who wants that? So that is a critical point that we drive home. And then we actually practice sensible, risky behavior.
Yeah.
So it could be everything from improv.
Yeah.
It could be, telling a joke in front of a group. It could be going up to a stranger and asking them to sign up for something. It could, whatever the thing is, public speaking. So we actually practice those things.
You prime yourself with those emotions, right?
Yeah.
Is what you like, okay.
You steel yourself to them. You prepare, you just get used to it because, it's risk taking. It's actually courage, because courage is when you do things that make you afraid, but you do them. Something makes you afraid, but you do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about when we, sorry, I'm just distracted by someone in my house, my family, working from home. So anyway, Beth, do you want to add to that?
The only thing I was going to say is that, I think when we talk about in Shared Sisterhood, we talk about dig, which is digging into yourself. We talk about bridge, building connections. And part of building connections is taking risks. You sometimes have to return to dig. And what Tina is talking about there is understanding yourself during this process is critically important. What are you actually afraid of? Right? What is it that's actually driving that? And that can be incredibly powerful, because one of the things that you often realize is I have drank the water of this inherent competitiveness in this workplace. I see that there's only ever one woman on this board. I see that there's only ever one. And I know that if I'm going to have to beat out every other woman at this table to get that spot, right? And I don't want to say that because it makes me sound bad, but we all see it. We all know it. And I think owning that and say, okay, but to Tina's point, reframing, well, what are all the things I'm losing by taking that perspective? I think I'm gaining a potential job or a potential promotion, right? But I'm losing the potential to have these great connections. I'm losing the potential to be better and greater and happier and more well, and to change the workplace so we can all achieve great things together. And so we often talk about that, the making the pie bigger that Tina was talking about. Oftentimes we are so narrow in what we think the pie is. It's money, it's status, it's money, it's status. And with Shared Sisterhood, we're like, but what about the human connection? What about my life is better because Tina and I are connected. I am happier. I have thought about things I could never think about before. I have accomplished things I never think about before. My pie has expanded because I've thought beyond just those very narrow senses of success and accomplishment. And we have to own that about ourselves. Like, why, like, how many times have you done something and you look back, you're like, the only reason I'm doing this is because I want to prove everybody wrong in this way. And like, is that, and I think that sort of reframing is part of what we ask people to do in dig.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. And I know that we have talked a little bit about dig, bridge. Can we talk a little bit more about advance before we get to the next question?
Sure. So collective advance. So that's a critical thing, because we're not necessarily talking about individual advance. We're saying once people have done dig, which is introspective, figuring out your own attitudes and assumptions, and they've bridged, which is connecting with people authentically, they are now ready to link arms and assess the people processes around them and say, how can we make these systems more equitable? And so it could be recruiting, onboarding, socialization, training, pay, promotion. We tell people to pick one system and then say, let's say that it's pay. Okay. You might say a first step is, let's just see how equitable is pay across race, across gender, across division. What are we seeing? What are we seeing for people? Do we have any disparities? If we do, how are we going to redress those? How are we going to address those? Are we gonna or are there going to be reparations? So we say, okay, we know that women have been paid 30% less. Are we going to pay them, make up for that? Or are we just going to go forward? How are we going to communicate that throughout the organization? How are we going to address the inevitable backlash that's going to come? Those are all examples of collective advance, but it's at the system level where we're saying we have not lived up to our standards, or we want to get even better in our pursuit of equity. And here are specific actionable things that we can do. So once you do the pay equity audit and you go through the ideas of a communication plan, what are the metrics that you have in place to assess your progress? Who specifically is responsible for this? How are they going to pay for it? What's the budget line code? Literally getting into that level of detail, and then figuring out, okay, every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, we're going to report on our progress, and hopefully we're improving. But if not, here are some of the consequences that may accrue as a result of not doing that, because unfortunately there are many initiatives that have these bold views and metrics, but there are people just continue to live their day-to-day lives no matter what. And year after year, nothing has changed. So that's sort of how we approach this.
Yeah. And I'll say quickly on that too, that, part of what we talked about a moment ago with taking a risk and looking around and saying, oh, the structure here has set it up. So I am in implicit competition with the women around me at all times, right? Like we know from research that this can prompt this sort of hyper competitiveness, the queen bee, the cattiness that we always talk about women being. Oftentimes that's structural in nature. It's the structure when you look around that's creating that level of competition. If there's only ever one person of color at the highest level of the organization, what is the message that's being sent? You can say all the words that you want to say about DEI and whatever, but what people are looking at is what you've put on the table, right? Yeah. And the same thing, you know, gender, racial equity, all the intersections among those things, disability, et cetera, is we as employees are looking at what you're doing. And with Collective Advance, what we're saying is, the way to make that change is together, for us to be, at least to have a group of people who are saying, this is not okay. And here are the things that we want you to demonstrate to us to make the change that we think is necessary for us all to get ahead, and to reframe those conversations so that we can do that, right? Like it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game and that only one of us gets to win and everybody else gets to lose. And that's hard work, which is why you have to have those bridges. It's hard work. There are going to be times where they're going to try to divide and conquer you. Well, okay, well, maybe we'll promote you, right? And everybody else will get their turn in good time, right? Those are the sort of divide and conquer tactics that some organizations can put into place. And so that collective part of the advance is really important, as Tina said.
Thank you both. This actually really struck me. So what's the difference between friendship and bridging?
Well, so this is critical. And so in the book, when we talk about bridging, we use some of the social science research on friendships to underscore some of the points. But then, as you mentioned, Heather, we draw a distinction. So friendship is, you know, you may be in a relationship with someone who you like, but you might not ever talk about inequity. You might not ever talk about race. So bridging requires a centering of the value of equity, which means that I can bridge with someone who I'm not friends with. And I may be friends with someone who I never bridge with. Beth and I happen to be friends, and we're sisters in terms of shared sisterhood, right? So we became friends first, and then and as a result, we started to bridge. But a critical distinct, you know, there's in the book, we talk about the research about how often people from historically marginalized groups want to talk about whatever that identity trait is that causes that has marginalized, that has been used against them to marginalize them. But people in power dominant categories often don't want to talk about that. And so what that means is that people from historically power dominant groups often want to be friends, but they don't want to bridge. And so in that way, we can be talking past each other. It's like one relational partner wants to really get into the nitty gritty of larger collective level issues that are confronting them as an individual. And they want to know that they can trust that partner, potential bridge partner, to have this conversation. But the other person's like, girl, let's just go get drinks. Let's go dancing. And
that's so dramatic. That's so, I don't want to talk about that. It's just such a downer. Like, I don't know.
Why do you bring that up without realizing that it's sort of like when I got married to my husband, or when I met my husband, there were certain men who I dated who were not able to have conversations about feminism. That's not someone I'm going to trust my heart with. That's not so, if we cannot have basic conversations about those issues, then we're not going to go to a deeper level of friendship, because I cannot trust you. That's what you're telling me. Beth, do you want to add anything? That's Cinderella, by the way, in the picture. I was so stoked when Cinderella.
I know. Well, I was about to use that as an example here, right?
Sorry.
Maybe, right? You have a friend as someone you could go see Salt and Pepper with, right? Like you enjoy that sort of music, and you could go to a concert with them, have a good time, go your separate ways. Wow, we're friends. But if you're going to bridge with that person, you can have a conversation about, you know, like being a Black woman, right, in the 1990s, growing up, and what that meant, right, to have groups like Salt and Pepper, right? Like that's a different level of conversation. One is we have similar interests, we enjoy things, right? That's what friendship often is. Bridging requires something more. And in bridging, there is an innate lack of symmetry and asymmetry, right?
Mhm.
And it's not a bad asymmetry, but it's an asymmetry based on the fact that there are going to be, when we're talking about race, I'm going to listen to Tina more than I talk, right? Because Tina, right, my whiteness gives me a privilege about race that Tina does not have. If we are talking about, you know, if I'm in a
Religion.
conversation with a woman who is disabled and in a way that I am not, right, I'm going to listen more than I talk, right? If we're talking about religion, right, and Tina as a Christian in the hegemonic sort of way that it is in the United States is going to listen to my experience raising children who are not a part of that religion. And so I think, again, that asymmetry is not a bad thing. In friendships, we often think asymmetry is a bad thing, right? In bridging, it's a necessary part of it.
Great. That's a
Thank
good.
you for going into this. This is, I feel like it's so important. Again, I'm going to be mindful of your time, although I really will have to have a second session on this, because actually this question here is also something that struck me from your writing. But why don't we just skip to this? What is your big goal for shared sisterhood?
Ooh.
Well, I can tell you that when I look around what's happening in the world, in Israel, in the Middle East, on the continent of Africa, in the United States, in Asian, there are so many schisms in the world. There are so many opportunities for people in power to stop centering themselves and consider how they could use their power in a positive way, in a collaborative way. And I know, what does it say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. But the shared sisterhood is a model of where, I want to be powerful. Not for myself, though. Not just, I want to be powerful because that would enable me to elevate, have a platform, create a platform so that other people could be elevated and then build their own platforms. So the idea is not to hoard power, which is such a traditional notion of what power means. It's about the self.
Boring.
Yeah, it's so boring. Exactly. So even the word shared sisterhood, anyone can be a sister regardless of gender. We are intentionally turning masculine notions of what it takes to be powerful and successful on its head. And my big, hairy, audacious goal is that CEOs, presidents, prime ministers will be talking about shared sisterhood as a way that they've been able to bring equity and peace and harmony to their societies or organizations. Beth?
I share that big, hairy, audacious goal. I will say, I think my big, hairy, audacious goal in line with that is just that we can actually get to a place of true equity where people can be themselves. People can bring their whole selves to work, and not just be tolerated, but be appreciated, right? Be welcomed. And that we can acknowledge the differences that people have faced, the discrimination that people have faced. And we can do that without this sort of self-flagellation that happens among people in power that paralyzes them from actually doing anything about it, right? That, oh, everything was, I can't even think about it. It was so bad. Well, think about it. Like, we face problems all the time, and it spurs people to think bigger, think bolder, to do wonderful things. How many women who are listening to this right now are entrepreneurs who have goals, who have creative goals? Well, turn that same creativity and force and conscientiousness towards this big problem, right? Which to me is the biggest problem of our time, which is racial and gender inequity in the workplace, right? If work and the joy of this has been, making it possible for everyone to succeed and to feel accomplished and to support themselves and to live in this world, the fact that that is not truly equitable, it's not achievable for everybody in accordance with their desires and their capabilities, is a true travesty, right? And we should be directing our resources towards solving this big problem. And I hope that shared sisterhood gives the language to people to be able to talk about this, to be like, I don't have to play the game your way, right? I don't have to, like Tina said, hoard power and lord it over you in the way that, society has done for hundreds of years. I can do something different, and I can share that and build relationships and do things in a way that make me feel good and make everyone around me feel good. And as an optimist, I like to think that that's possible. So.
Well, thank you for that. Grasshopper, we're so aligned with shared sisterhood. And I just feel so blessed for meeting you both and for, being able to introduce you to our community and maybe giving them the tools to articulate the next step forward. So thank you so much for this. And like I said, we might have to have a second session because there's so much more we want to know.
Heather, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's nice to meet the Grasshopper community.
Yes, absolutely. Welcome to the shared sisterhood community, Grasshopper.
We're super excited. All right. Have a great day.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Heather. Bye-bye.